Hey y'all, ladies and gents of the FGC. This is your favorite analyst, Rillian, bringing you more how to get good at fighting games content. This content will be rebroadcast from my own channel, Rillian2_MK, to our main 2_MK channel, with my full permission, of course. So what's happening today? We are looking at the other half of our new Kata 23, which will be released on Sunday. However, unlike pretty much every other Kata and bot we've done so far, you don't actually have to do any inputs whatsoever to get this to work. In fact, the only thing you need to be able to do is change some settings in your training modes. So let's look at those first for those of you who either want to, let's say, follow along or are watching this video later and just want to get started. CPU level is 8. 7 sort of works, but 8 is generally predictable. We've tested this with enough characters to know that Dalsim's behaviors don't really change. So pick any character you want, pick Dalsim as your opponent, set CPU difficulty to 8, and proceed as normal. The settings for this are usually with your own V gauge on auto recover, as mentioned before in previous streams on this particular topic. You can leave both health bars on auto recover just to save yourself some time. Don't give Dalsim V meter or CA gauge, it gets pretty tedious if you do. However, if you do that, make sure that you let it rock with the auto recover so that you don't end up in constant burning. There will be enough burning without that. So since I'm playing Colleen today, and I'm mostly doing this for some of my own practice, I'm just going to have some relative fun with it. The idea from before was simple. When you get close enough to Dalsim or he teleports onto you for a trick or something, he'll sometimes do that. And you're just looking for the button you can hit that probably won't be punished by anything he happens to hit right after the blocked Yoga Flame. Simple enough, right? But that's not really a lot you can learn from, and it's not a very strong thing to do with a Kata. It's hard to really learn much about either a matchup or spacing per se, especially against a character who's so good at keeping you out. Learning close range spacing is good, learning long range spacing is way harder. Colleen is important because if I do this on Chun-Li or Bison, you're going to see a lot of stuff that's related to their longer buttons or better setups. Colleen doesn't actually have those. She has long buttons, but they're really slow relative to most things. And they tend to extend her hurt box forward a little bit earlier than most characters that you've seen so far. Nope, doesn't get under that late. However, she obviously has other tools she can use, and I'll be using some of them as I go. But that's not really what this particular disc guidance is about. This is the other half of the kata, because focusing on this, for most characters, there's the button that you hit so close that it's practically a punish, where Dalsim, it can't hit anything basically. He's minus, and you have way too much time to hit with like crouch medium punch or something. Something 5 frame-ish that you can just land because he's way too close to you. But that's not really going to be the situation you normally see. A good Dalsim, or any other character really, isn't going to be just doing their minus moves right in your face where they have to then worry about getting away. The plan would usually be to space themselves out such that this isn't an issue, so that you have to decide, should I hit this button, should I hit that button, are they going to hit this button, that button? No one wants to just be close enough to, even on a -2 move, have to deal with the jab versus throw counter mix up. So we're going to assume that that's not what's happening. We're going straight for doing the main thing you already have seen for this kata, namely hitting a particular button. Colleen only has basically one option, which is why she's a good example for this. She has functionally too, but you don't really want to use the second that much. And there's a lot of spacing issues that come up from that. But the main thing we're working on today is how to deal with Dhalsim when he just starts throwing out limbs at you like that. Even if you happen to block two of them, you need to find the thing that you press just to make him not hit more buttons that also won't open you up to a bunch of damage from him. So you can mess around with him and beat him up cathartically. It's not really like other kata where you have to care a whole lot. But there's one good example. He was at the range where he could hit the medium kick, and I was at the range where the stand heavy kick really wouldn't help that much because the way the boxes move and so on could have caused me some problems. The stand heavy kick really isn't a good option for Colleen because Dhalsim will also just duck under it. So she has to basically either use sniping kick or... Did I jump forward? Ooh. As you can guess, I'm also working on how to get through that with super without actually doing much. Can't do it at the beginning, you know the timing. So that's not going to reach, no matter what I do. In fact, there is a range where Chun-Li can respond, but Colleen basically can't respond at all. In the strictest sense of it, of course. Dhalsim has all the options, Colleen has very few. Basically. But she has that one, which is way longer range than you'd expect, based on the general stubby buttons narrative of this game. And she also has that, of course. But the range you have to be at for that to be a good idea is a little weird. So you will see it sometimes and I'll hit it just because, oh, that Yoga Flame clipped me at the very last second. Furthest possible it could be out. But we are focused on the few scenarios in which Dhalsim has either found a spacing where he can't get hurt that way, or he does that. So there are three things he can do. Basically, he can hit medium punch twice, he can hit medium kick twice, and he can hit medium punch into medium kick. Obviously the other works as well, but you'll nearly never see it done. And depending on the range he does these things at, you really won't be able to do too much about the second one. The only reason to do this move in certain spaces sometimes would be to set it up so that you try to do something and fail. So if it were simple that he could just not hit buttons because you would hit your buttons and win, then this would be a really weak character. He hasn't ever been quite that weak. He's always been able to just hit medium kick and then go into another medium kick. So the aim here is that I'm not trying to get too close to him most of the time, actually. He spends a lot of time in the air and I should probably discourage that, but you get the idea. I'll throw in some of my own practice, namely countering certain things from the air, so on. But overall, you can see that once Dhalsim is at that range, he has a lot of options. Whereas you obviously have far less. But to get really good, I'm sure you've seen the higher level players figure out things they can do against Dhalsim in those situations. What you're looking for is a button that will generally clip him in a trade or in a crush counter that is to your advantage so much that you'll feel much safer throwing it out than not. This does not apply to his heavy long buttons, mind you. There's ways to deal with that, and those will get beaten in the same spaces that we're looking for. In fact, they're usually the button that you end up beating, which is kind of confusing because it means that the trade thing from before becomes important. So for Colleen, let's be a little bit weird and unrealistic about this. I'm going to use that move instead of actually doing anything in particular. And I'm going to use it for a lot of situations. So there's point one. You'll note he went for the medium and then went for the shorter kick close by, and somehow she didn't get hit. In fact, she hit him. Weird. The CPU isn't that great, but it normally doesn't make silly mistakes. It makes very specific mistakes. You normally need someone to help you who understands the character to tell you, yeah, the CPU is not doing anything sensible, you should just not do that. But sometimes it's doing something that you can learn from even if it's not sensible in that particular matchup. And that's important here. So he's creating space. And I'm pushing back. And nothing much is happening right now. But here's the normal space. He teleports out. We've gone over that part before. Him teleporting out is no threat to me. Bat dash. So you see that I'm just basically hitting the heavy punch because I don't actually care. So far I've seen no evidence that me hitting the heavy punch after he has done 2 close range buttons is any danger to me. So I'm waiting for him to prove that, basically. See, that range is the range I was talking about before, where it's actually that I'm supposed to hit with her V-skill. He has some reactions to it, but none that I care about enough that I won't hit it. And in Colleen's case, she has better tools, because if he does decide to backdash, and you are pretty convinced he's going to do that, then that move that I was using before comes in. But remember that to some extent the CPU does read your inputs and it does adapt its actions based on reading those inputs. So it can become an issue for you. This is not a zoning game. He wins particularly easily, mind you. Well, at least not when they're at full screen. Because if he does the long yoga fire, you can generally dash under it. I just am not bothering. And if he does the regular one, I can actually just hailstorm it away. And while he can, in fact, get in on you by a way of doing that, it's not usually in his favor to do so against Colleen in the first place. So with all that said, I want to stand here, where he has to hit buttons and can't just do whatever he wants. But I have to understand those buttons. So about here. And usually when he's done the yoga fire, that's the basic time you have for moving to that space. Try not to damage him too much because you'll end up with him getting that and surprising you and messing with your flow. You can also note exactly how minus he is after certain things when he slides at closer ranges. So he wasn't going to slide there because it's a dumb idea, basically. Also, do note that generally if you're walking forward, he doesn't have a lot he can do to you in terms of blocking that situation. So use that to help you get through this kata a bit easier. So now full version. Standing here and trying to block. 1, 1, 2, and I hit a button. I hit a button because the Yoga Fire is never going to hit me. Only EX could, and most of the time it won't. Let's try standing right here. And at this point, it's really quite easy because you just have to experiment. You just hit buttons to see what will happen. 1, 2, 1. This is what actually makes Dalsim fairly hard to deal with. The fact that he doesn't really have to keep going. And therefore you have to find relatively safe or problematic for him buttons to hit in these situations so that you can keep up the pressure on him when he decides not to hit more buttons. So what are Kaleem's good options? Well, she has this, which could beat a lot of things, I think. 1 button, 2 button. That looks safe. I can probably get away with that. 1, 2. Don't worry about the fact that your buttons don't always hit Dalsim. It is actually because if you hit them, and especially if you mashed up in certain timing, the CPU knows that you hit them, so it just doesn't do things that would result in it getting hit. You could try hitting them a little later though, because it would have already started its move at certain points or stuff like that. Learning that timing is equally useful, but not really the point here. Now he's often going to go into the air, but going into the air at that range can be really unsafe for him, depending on the skill of the player in doing insta-air gale, their willingness to do it, and the spacing that he's at in the first place, because if he's too far away, the gale won't do anything either. So I'm standing here and looking for that situation. 1, 2, clip, and he went up, and I don't get hit. The situation goes back in my favor at least a little bit. This is actually true for almost every character with longer buttons, who has a reason to hit them twice. If you can find a closer button that will usually not get you killed for hitting it, you're in a good state. I keep forgetting that that dash cancel only works on the other one. So we're standing here again. Long button. I hit buttons. You also have to be able to learn when Dalsim has pushed you out in order to take advantage of things by whiff punishing you, functionally speaking. Too far. Obviously, Colleen also has this option. And many characters have things that can be done in ways that armor them. This is also a good way to learn this. Timing and spacing wise specifically, because the armored move and the armor on the move will usually activate during Dalsim's hit with no chance of him being able to not hit the button because you did it. However, since most of these moves do not armor through his other stuff, it's a good way to learn about it. Of course, in all this you will also learn to block teleport mix-ups, which is something that our main bot for Dalsim doesn't actually cover at all and isn't intended to, because we knew you could get it mostly from this CPU. And therefore, while it wasn't mentioned in the bot itself, you can consider it mentioned now. So there's a good example. He actually pushes himself out far enough that if I try to go in that way, I'm just going to get hurt in some way. Even if he seemingly chooses to hit a button, I can't just do Colleen's V-skill and get in. There's really no reason for me to try it either. But after the 2 medium kicks in the standard range that those are done, that does work. And the main difference is whether or not Dalsim can actually reach you with a slide and therefore should have the option of hitting it. You can spend a lot of time trying to identify whether or not slide is an option Dalsim has and therefore if you need to be scared. Colleen also shows you the complexity of using buttons or attacks once you have walked under a yoga fire to trade with Dalsim's limbs in a way that is advantageous to you, but that's extremely advanced stuff. There are certain characters who have very good options for this. She is not really on the very good options gang, but there are things. The difficulty further than that is learning how to move in such a way that you end up at the right spacings all the time, even though your opponent has so many options for changing where they are on the screen that is practically just distracting. Also, once you've learned the Yoga Flame spacings, most of those work quite well for his medium kick. Not so much medium punches, but that depends on your character. So it's all the usual grind, but you're not really grinding against Dalsim. He's just really good at letting you learn the thing you also need to do. So I'm going to start incorporating that now. And you'll see how much the flow of the match changes when I can. Now this isn't to say that a regular opponent wouldn't block most of these, they could even teleport out of them. There are different things they can do to save themselves from that particular button. But then it starts opening up other options, so you don't have to worry so much about that. At least for Colleen that is so. This is also generally true for other characters. You have usually one really sort of bad, perhaps unsafe option that gets opened up by the restrictions, you could say, on your opponent's ability to punish you that come when you're in the perfect space. Another similar option for her is actually to just sweep. The problem being that Dalsim has too many ways to instantly get into the air and then attack downwards, so it's not usually a great plan. Still, it is more or less a mix-up here rather than a problem. So I'm going to also change now to using the crouch medium kick in these situations. And see what does beat it, what spacings beat it, and so on. The only reason I don't use it for this generally is because one, he can teleport out of it, but you can also do some jump stuff. You should be careful with your crouch medium kick. And most characters don't actually have a crouching medium kick quite long enough to really grief Dalsim with this. So, I'm not suggesting it as a main option. Hit the button too early. Yep, probably work on it. So here we can see the main problem with the medium kick. The way Dalsim's box moves when he wants to do slide is so much more likely to end in you suffering than him. Part of the reason why it's so important is because, as mentioned before, you do have to be able to V-cancel the button you hit with. Because you lose a lot of your options for getting really good button damage, and what you may want to end up using is not necessarily going to be a button that has a combo. But you can't really just afford to let Dalsim get away with stuff without doing heavy damage to him whenever you can. So, you have to try to do stuff like that, for example. As for me, I'm mashing the hell out of it, so it probably is not going to work that way. Understanding your spacing relative to all characters is important, but Dalsim is the best at showing you all your spacing and when you're doing things you shouldn't be doing. He's also repetitive enough in CPU form that you get this concept of where he is supposed to be, and he doesn't have enough walk speed to mess with you quickly in those ranges. There's other layers that you can put on as well if you want to. At least one for every character. You can get certain levels of readiness for other moves to deal with stuff when he happens to manage to jump out of the way. For example, anti-airing his dive, well, yeah, we'll go with dive kick, drill. And of course, as you can see, practicing just being able to do moves when you're not completely confident of the block stun you're in, and have to deal with the game's input buffer and get better at understanding that, which is part of the reason why the input buffer is there. It is to help players who don't easily recognize block stun to manage their reversals. Otherwise, they end up mashing buttons, which is part of the complaint of the game now. But in Dalsim's case, this doesn't save you because you can't just mash heavy buttons and expect everything to be fine. Why didn't I just jump? Throw that. Thank you. That's better. Stuff like that, where he'll be barely out of range and you thought you had it, but you missed. Similar to the Ryu Kata, you have to decide, oh, I need to do something from here that doesn't put me in danger and makes my opponent either stressed or have some belief that they need to do something else. Not necessarily because you hit them, but because they're pretty sure that, you know, maybe with more meter, you're proving your awareness, basically. You're showing them, I know what you're doing, I know this spacing, you can't just get away from me for free. I think if I have to either cancel that differently or not at all. Pretty sure it does cancel normally though. Problem is that I probably can't hit confirm it. Probably can't hit confirm it. At my level of skill, that is. I don't know if, that's not to say whether or not it's in itself hit confirmable, only that I can't do it. That will be a lot more work to get to. There we go. It's a little wasteful, but on the other hand, it does push him out in a way that might help me one day. Oh wait. Now I need to test if it works if I'm not hard cancelling into it. Probably not. No, it does. It's those little things that you might not know right away that you need to work out with your character and figure out whether or not you're in a good position. Because that sort of thing makes a huge deal of difference in any game. Being able to expect, okay, my opponent is going to do something here that I can hit with a heavy punch, and I can't normally defeat this opponent. I'm not trying to save this up for the ending of some cool combo. I should go for this now and get like my huge amount of stun and go for the freeze. Set up for the win, like that. Oh, it's not quite enough, sadly. But you get the idea. So we're going back to figuring out buttons to hit when he's poking at you. Note that this is probably easier on other characters because against Colleen he spends a lot more time in the air and a lot more time throwing out Yoga Flame. I think this was demonstrated in previous stream though, so moving to her shouldn't be too confusing. But of course, once again, note, this really isn't about hitting him or making sure that he's doing those moves or learning how to beat those moves. It's all about understanding where you are standing and what your options are because you're standing there. For example, that was incorrect. I should have hit V-skill there. Or sweep. Probably V-skill though, because I expected him to go airborne. All of this is also helpful because it forces Dalsim to use certain options that he doesn't normally spend a lot of time using. At ranges where you can do something about them, at least a little bit of something. And that sort of control in matches is the part of the matches you care about. It would be good to learn to do lots of damage to Dalsim, yes, but it's equally important to be able to do controlling damage to Dalsim. To condition your opponent to do specific things based on their ability to do those specific things and not other things. I think I've stun off, so you're not going to get to see anyone frozen today. The CPU will basically read all your inputs, as I said. So you can use this to figure out how well can I actually condition or control things to the point where they really can't be mixed up. There's no way for even the CPU at level 8 to figure out how to deal with me. Keeps on ending up too close now. Where was this before? I'm gonna have to work on what to do when I actually have to learn to cancel that. Oh, there we go. And that was bad muscle memory. In other words, I haven't been training on this long enough with her, this is the second session, to recognize that space and then go, oh, wait, that's the V-skill space. That's where I'm supposed to hit V-skill only. You can also use your V-reversal for certain things in this match, but depends on the character quite a lot. So I won't consider that to be part of the kata per se, but you can still definitely learn what the impact of using your V-reversal in this training is. However, I wouldn't really say that this is related to the kata. That's more so actual Dalsim matchup stuff because you don't actually need to know that for anything. As you go up through this, just stress yourself more and more. Make sure that you've hit all the right buttons. If you have an air throw, throw that in. Get yourself used to using it. If you don't have an air throw, treat it the same as the bot and try to get a good jumping button on him. Note is much easier with an air throw for most characters. Still keep on hitting that punch early. In situations like that, for example, I should actually try to hit a certain form of air-to-air button rather than going for the air throw. But again, the amount of focus you have to do certain things is limited, and Dhalsim will help you train that as well. And it won't be stuff that you only need for Dhalsim. Also, if you have projectile invincible moves, you can certain times get some cool counter zoning stuff out of it. But as you can guess, that takes a lot more time. Even more practice. This is how you can basically use the CPU to actually be a grind and not just something that you do because you don't have a real opponent and you don't expect it to make you better. Specific CPU opponents can be used for different things that will definitely make you better, and if you feel underconfident about coming up with those things yourself through observation, once again, mostly all you have to do is not focus on beating them so much as creating some situation that you can learn from. Not going to reach with that apparently, so yeah, we're pretty much at just either the heavy kick or the medium kick. Cool. I could have just left you like that. So while I clearly have tons of work to do on Colleen against this, for me personally, this is also fun enough that I can probably just do it for hours and get better at the game without specifically needing to do anything much. My Colleen gets very little practice in most scenarios, but if I fight Dhalsim for long enough, maybe I'll get something good. Now, the other thing you can do this for, as with almost all our stuff, is use it to learn a new character. Even if you have a relatively high skill level in the game, new character has come out, you know that you need to learn some matchups, some spacing, and so on. But learning spacing the regular way, quote unquote, is difficult because you just learn the space that you're in, but you don't learn a lot of the feelings that go with that space. So, I bought Zaku. I didn't play any Zaku. So, we're going to poke at what Zaku does and use this as a way of getting used to the character and playing him. I'm probably not going to be doing this with him in his older form, because his older form has different methods of handling Dhalsim. In fact, I wouldn't call it easy. because Dalsim has mix-ups that will get him out of Gram stuff, but it certainly isn't a crippling nor difficult endeavor once you know how to block certain things. And Dalsim's health versus Deku's health is really no contest. So, instead of doing that, let's switch up and see what I can get in terms of figuring out how to deal with him. Also, I'm loving this green. So as you can see, when he's not fighting Colleen, he has a much higher tendency to push more buttons than do that. He will still definitely do the... Oh, I didn't even realize that. Thank goodness for Zeku's super evasive hitboxes that apparently involve getting entirely over those. That's really useful. So we're looking at stuff here. That works, but that changes me back into another mode, so I don't necessarily want to hit that. And I'm doubting that the older version has that option. Anyway. That hits from quite far. Now, again, normally these moves are too slow. You don't go fishing with heavy punches in neutral, but maybe there's a timing for it here. On the other hand, when you're just poking around in neutral, apparently isn't that great. So, there's presumably a specific space where I want to hit Crouch Heavy Punch against Yoga Flame. And there's a specific space where I blatantly don't. Do I want to hit Stand Heavy Punch instead? Let's see. Getting used to the block stun again. It doesn't look like it. Remember I mentioned before that Colleen has the tendency to get clipped out when Dalsim slides after that. Maybe the Dalsim in this case has not yet been doing it, but it doesn't give me the feeling that Zeku is the type of character you can just slide at when he's hitting Crouch Heavy Punch and everything will be fine. There's one spacing for the obviously, but that was more so because, oh look, this whiffed entirely. So obviously it's not going to work there. But if that was supposed to be a slide, and I think it was, that did not go well for him. Presumably because of interaction of hit and hurt bosses. Maybe some other reason. But he definitely can't slide. At least not that slide. And you don't really care so much about things like light slide because there's nothing he gets much off of it. And you could also just hit faster buttons at that point, so... It's about conditioning your opponent to do specific things, where specific things is usually trying to get away from you, which Dalsim was probably going to do anyway, but you know. But that button is woefully insufficient for pretty much everything else. It works there, and it looks like it doesn't really help me otherwise. If it crash counter is great. And I'm learning now that I should probably only hit it once and try to cancel immediately. But I don't think it's even cancelable. So I'm not going to get the full hit. I'll get the crush counter and then I'll push myself out and I won't get the second hit. Does this matter to me in this matchup? Maybe not. What if the second hit knocks down or something and I don't want that to happen? No, there it is. It's a knockdown. Is it a knockdown when I only hit with one hit? It should be. Lots of exploration is able to be done in these sort of things. No, it doesn't knock down when I only hit with one hit. This is possibly useful to me. So you can literally learn your character by just fighting Dalsim and hitting buttons against his stuff to figure out what is your best option at certain spaces with your opponent in a very common state in the game, namely -2 to -3. Faster opponents might be able to hit other buttons, but you're looking at a range where most lights don't put you in a lot of bad situations. And if you thought that was a problem, you could just test the mediums anyway. So here we have young Zeku's medium punch is not very good for this apparently. It's like most crouching medium punches. Once Dalsim has done it from the right range, it doesn't do anything to him at all. But if he happens to be too close, it still works fine. It counter hits most things. It's actually a little bit shorter than I expected it to be because I would say that when he does it, there are spaces I expect to clip him where I didn't. Now, does yours also crouching heavy punch also work? Because old Zeku's crouching heavy punch is incredible. But I'm not so sure on the range. I'm not as convinced. And it's one of those moves where I doubt Dalsim is going to get hurt if he decides to go into the air immediately. Might go the other way entirely. But maybe that would hit him out of instant air gale. That again, you'll have to find a Dalsim player to ask. If you're in our area, ask Lucky D somewhere. Probably on Twitter. I'm not sure if he actually does things on Twitter. I should ask. So yeah, I have much more faith in young Zeku's version of this button for clipping people at range. But I suppose the trade-off is that his older form does way more damage when he gets it right. You gotta know how to cancel that properly, I do not. But a session or two would give me an easy way to figure that out. I could just turn this off and see if I can actually cancel, and then go back to this to see if I can time the cancel, which is a different matter. I think it's back airgram for this. Probably medium. There we go. But there's the Gale. Thank you, Dalsim. So now I know that I might have been misspaced, but I'm suspicious now that if my opponent just does Yoga Flame into Instant Air Gale, that I'm not really in a position to get that. But I mean, Zeku might have other options that I could use. And Instant Air Gale is not like one of the best things you can find yourself doing right in someone's face when they are in this situation. But he certainly gets away often. Oh, that light kick reaches. That actually... And again, now I'm curious, because I now need to figure out, was I really close at that moment? I was clearly close enough that it made a difference. But that stand light kick seems pretty good for this. Presumably because it will keep him from doing much, but even if he backdashes, Dalsim's that backdash not being very fast, I wouldn't then have spent a lot of time doing stuff that I can't help with. In fact, that's even better, because he doesn't look like he can even move out of that. And eventually, the computer will read what you're doing, or perhaps it's just luck, and figure out what to do there. So if you've got a Dalsim or an enemy that tends to jump away from you, you have an option here. Backlight kick into backlight kick gram, quick things. And they're going to spend so much time in the air, and since back jumps no longer allow for direct attacks. Do they do it on anyone anymore? I don't think so. You're pretty safe to go. But here I am getting hit by another Yoga Flame, so spacing is definitely an issue, and I probably shouldn't just do that. But what I really changed to this old form for is to look for what the Crouch Medium Punch does, because his Crouch Medium Punch in this form is really good. Like, really, really good. It combos into basically nothing. But again, this is about B-cancel stuff. Sadly, Desaku doesn't get as much off those as you'd like. But that button is so good, in fact, that it does solve the problem we were having before. And shows you Colleen's limitation. If the opponent decides, I'm just going to hit buttons from over here, characters with very short buttons don't have a lot of good options. But Zeku can just do that. With that button. Yes, it does fails like everything else when you're way too far out, but he does have to worry about far more than he had to worry about against Colleen. And it's not as easy to get over as her crouch medium kick, so you see more interactions happen. And you just have to decide how to capitalize off those. Similarly though, Dalsim does have a range where he can make your life miserable by doing something else altogether. As you see from that trade, the timing wise, it's not that Zeku's at disadvantage in terms of timing. If you are at disadvantage, it will almost always be spacing. You don't have air throw in this form, do you? Right, you don't. Now part of the key of this is that if it's Dalsim matchup you're concerned about, and that makes you come to think of this, you are generally looking for something you can combo into a knockdown because of Dalsim's generally terrible wake up. But there's a good point. You also don't want to take a lot of risks with block stun getting you confused. When you're much higher level at the game and have been playing and have huge amounts of experience, then by all means go for that. But here, I can't say that I know for sure what is happening when I get hit with a long standing medium kick. And therefore, if I don't understand the block stun on that move, I'm going to get pummeled if I just mash this all the time. I have to find either my understanding of the timing of it, or a different button to solve the problem when the opponent is in a particular space and I want to hit them because they've hit something. This is also just a quick way to find out your longest possible relatively fast button to hit and save yourself a lot of stress. Like, if I slide at him, what will happen here? I don't actually know yet. I would presume that if he were to try to get out of the way, it would be an issue. And I would also presume that if he teleported perfectly timed, that I would get basically nothing. But if your character has slides, especially slides with not too much distance but a lot of active frames, you might get some good stuff off of this sort of thing too, because while the opponent is able to respond to it and punish it, depending on how far out you were, the active frames get used up, so they're not actually that punishable. Unfortunately, once again, Dalsim is not likely to punish you a whole lot. He's not that sort of character, especially not when the CPU is doing it. And you should always get some information from a Dalsim player. Or you can just play for really long until he randomly happens to do something. This is also a good way to just get used to the speed of your normals. Range is the first thing it teaches you, but speed can help you as well. For example, I'm quickly learning that if Dalsim happens to decide to hit medium kick and is far enough out, active frames or not, something doesn't work out there. Why exactly? Don't know yet, but I know it happens. And therefore I should see what that means relative to Zeku's kick. drops a trap in the corner for these things as well. But as you can see, the difference in character makes a huge change to the flow. Do I use this most of the time because I can mostly get away with it? It's not like hitting Colleen's where, for example, Insta Air Gale will do nothing. Here I'm basically sliding right into it. So I'm risking quite a lot to get stuff here. And that looked very punishable to me. So maybe this is my last resort when I really think I'm going to get away with it, but I should just generally stick to the crouch heavy punch. What makes it even harder with Zeku, therefore, is to recognize, oh, I'm not in that position at all. I'm not on the form of him that matters for this at all. All these things come in, and you end up having to decide them. That push out is good. Can I dash up off that? That should have been the first thing I checked, really. Nope. I mean, I can, but as we've pretty much decided before, crush counters are more likely going to be a way to get V meter in neutral in Season 3, probably more so than a way to get dash up damage. If you want damage, you do one thing. If you want V meter for some reason, do something else. So let's give him a little check or two on specials, just in case they are actually something here that I can use. That seems to consistently trade, and that trade seems to be relatively in my favor, which might mean that I'm too slow about it, or something else that I'm not clear on at the moment. Frame data is usually enough to figure this sort of thing out by yourself. Just understanding how to read frame data. But if you don't understand how to read frame data very well, or you don't tend to remember what frame data mean in particular situations, this is another good way to deal with that aspect of this game. Especially for special moves, because it will actually tell you when you've done the move as a reversal, which basically means that regardless of whether or not you put it in too early, because you can, due to, once again, the large input buffer, the move comes out as soon as it possibly can. So you can use that information to know whether or not your opponent could have done anything about it, based on whether or not they tried to and succeeded. Until you see reversal, you can't be absolutely sure. I'm loving that evasive hitbox. Who else can just jump over Yoga Flames? Well, Yoga Fire in this case. I bet you can jump over Yoga Flames too, because most people can do that. But still. Nope, that takes way too long and has no armor. So we see the problem with this one being that mostly it's a range thing. But it seems that because it is a special move, it tends to trade with most of Dalsim's stuff, so when you're in a weird situation and you know he's going to hit something, but you can't be sure which thing, it looks like you can at least get a trade out of it by doing that move instead. It figures that Kareen would be able to. Chun-Li does not do enough of a flip. Colleen, you have to be able to do it on reaction, which is hard. So this move is way too short range for me to decide to use it for this purpose, but there's probably a spacing at which is the best idea. So I'll try to keep that in mind. What else we got? We've got stuff like this, but I can't imagine that working. That said, maybe there's a form of execution of that move where it does work. So let's try... I've definitely got the reversal timing for that part. What else can I do? And we know that Zaku's medium kick is quite good. And we also know that it doesn't hit that high, so... maybe that's something I can use here. The problem with medium kicks is that they tend to set up the situation that you get hit by Dalsim stuff more so than they do it the other way. For some reason. This isn't true for those characters who have the short medium kicks, but you're not really trying to do the same thing in their cases anyway. So that works, and could probably be cancelled into good damage. Same way we've always been trying to do with this setup. But then what? I don't know how to do his combo, but if I ever wanted a moment to show me how to do it, this is probably that. Because it's easy to say, okay, I know how to do his combo under regular conditions, but can you do it when you are hit confirming out of stuff that you were trying to hit Dalsim with and weren't even sure that you hit in the first place? Heavier training. Having to hit that multiple times is going to really get to me if I play this character seriously ever. I should just run when he does that. As Kata go up more and more, they will tend to have more parts and have more complicated levels of focus within their aims. This is presuming that whatever your previous Kata trained you in is enough mentally to get something done. That is enough damage that I would just mash that sometimes. Until I get better at actually doing the full cancel, yeah, I'm probably better off just going to do that. As you can see, this spacing seems a little off. Because I was sure I was able to hit him from those sorts of spacings before. Even though it looks like the crouch heavy punch is way shorter. No, I can't. So what have we got? His medium kick is actually, as mentioned before in other training, namely Ryubat, a lot shorter than it looks. Even though it is good, it is not that long. You can end up in situations like that. Can I get away with some command normals here? Probably not. Now note that just because a move looks as, or is as slow as that one, doesn't necessarily mean you shouldn't try to use it sometimes. Key being sometimes. It has a lot to do with the mix-up of making your opponent have to deal with going high or going low altogether. Right, your air throw is not a regular move, is it? There we go. But it doesn't look like that helps him at all. Dalsim has very blatant options to hit there. So it looks like your best bet with young Zaku is to simply not be in that space. Although, there's really no reason to play young Zaku too much in this matchup anyway, so I don't think it would come up. And yet somehow this is surprisingly good, which makes me doubt that I made the correct check there, because this should be good too, right? Nope, not quite. Some I don't have as much faith in that button as in others. Once again, there is a difference between things that hit low and hit mid relative to certain hitboxes and so on. So, okay. Range is not going to be the be-all and end-all of this check in the first place. Hitboxes are super important as well. So maybe it's luck that old form keeps on hitting with that button and young form can't, or maybe it's specifically meaningful in heavy ways. And hours of testing are usually required to know that sort of thing for sure. Understanding deep nuance of character in these ways. But I'm definitely willing to hit it, I'll say that much. And I might be willing to hit it at ranges where I wouldn't hit the crouch heavy punch. Although there are not a lot of ranges where I wouldn't be at least willing to try that. It also helps deal with habits that you have of punishing or setting up things one way versus another based on which character you're playing. And this is important because the stressful situations one ends up in where you must react extremely fast due to maybe blocking a move you didn't even expect to block, but seeing a chance to get a punish or to avoid more pressure. All of those things need to be ingrained very hard into your playstyle, or you'll end up doing things from one character that don't apply to the current character. And at worst, obviously your opponent blows you up. But even in the good scenario, you've probably given them more advantage than you needed to. So for me here, I'm thinking, well, what do I press after that? On Chun-Li I press a specific thing. On Colleen I press nothing at all. But Zeku is actually in the middle because I can't do the... I'm supposed to do the same thing I do with Chun-Li, but not with the cancel timing. So now what? I find myself cancelling even though the medium kit does not cancel. Or slipping to the Colleen side and hitting nothing even though I need to time the next action very tightly. So there's the cancel part. And once again, because I'm so used to the character needing to do that immediately. But now I've got that a little bit. I'm not necessarily saying this is a good idea. This is just a demonstration of a thing that can happen to you, especially when you move from a character who has a sequence that needs to be done manually to a character who cancels that sequence, or vice versa. And of course you can get so caught up in understanding and making sure you do that you forget your spacing and you have to start all over. That is how kata generally tend to work. You attempt to move on to the next step, and when you find that doing so makes you lose the step before, it's probably an indication that you need to go back to the other step and try to push into the new step only occasionally. I'm going to be cancelling that all day. It's also relatively easy to feel good about certain forms of successes when you're doing katas like this, because you can clearly see improvement because you're doing something that is very binary. You're not even thinking about, am I taking damage from Dalsim? Is this CPU Dalsim bodying me? None of those things matter to you at that moment. It's just, I'm aiming to hit crouch medium kick, hit with it, and then on counter hit, do forward medium grab. And I could be doing that for quite a long time. And whether or not the reason I fail is because of my spacing, or because of me doing things I shouldn't be doing with this character, I still have a very easy metric of success, namely that I do it right, even if Dalsim manages to hit me or something. I keep on feeling as if he has a counter. That's way too much Colleen and way too much Geese. Geese is out in Tekken 7, by the way, for those of you who do not know. That moves like it looks like a really stubby knee. I have no real reason at this point to assume that that's going to hit. And I assume correctly, it does not hit at all. There we go. That's about the range I expected it to hit at, and I don't think I get anything out of trying to hit with it either. So unused to characters with no air throw. Down you go. You'll also note that one of the best timings you can possibly ever get for this is out of a teleport mix-up. Properly blocking the teleport mix-up gives you the opportunity to test the buttons more so than anything else that I've found so far. So yes, if I ever want to learn to play Zaku properly, this is where I'm most likely going to start. Spending a long session, or multiple long sessions, fighting Dalsim, perfecting little things about the matchup, about the character, understanding ranges, understanding cancels, getting myself used to the idea that the air throw is different. Getting myself used to the idea that I could, for example, get clipped by a jump back kick, dash in, and then grab him with something good. Identifying that versus realizing that he jumped but didn't actually hit me, so I can't get away with that. There's an entire huge set of things you can learn this way. For example, I'm quickly learning that that does not grab in the way I expect it to. Another good reason for me to not pick up this character. I would be constantly making myself miserable. And the exact same thing happens when you're actually in a match. It's just that you haven't had the time to test and experience all of the options to recognize that they don't work, regardless of the reason. Although I must admit to being pretty tempted to play him just to jump over Yoga Flames and annoy people. And I don't think I'm ever going to be a person who calls them their right names. Okay, enough of that. Now this is useful once again because you do not have to change anything. If your bot is active on your account, you do not have to do anything that will cause you to lose it. And the bot will give you more ways of learning to deal with air-to-air stuff and basically hitting things versus Yoke Flame at all, even though it won't space itself quite as well as this. This is one of those situations where the Kata is a pure upgrade from the bot. It's not things you haven't done in the bot before. It's just things that are so difficult by comparison that you can move on to it afterwards. This is also the reason why the bot for Dalsim was created. Unlike most bots where the CPU is good at one thing and not good at other things, Dalsim does a good job of being good at what Dalsim is supposed to do, and therefore is functionally harder than most, but easy to defeat if you're going straight for damage or have good setups and can abuse his wake up. But eventually you will face a Dalsim player who will make it so stressful for you to even get in and get himself back out whenever you happen to, or he teleports for a mix-up that you actually block, that you're going to need to know those things. Therefore, that's our offering for you. You will be able to find it at 2-mk.org/katas. This will be Kata 23. And this will be available around 6 p.m. Eastern on Sunday as usual. Give or take an hour. If you are interested in other action, we are probably, as usual, hosting the stream from Balance Patch at the end of this content. So you can hang around for that, or just use it as the separate discussion area. That said, if you are in the Boston area, I strongly suggest that you actually, hang out in the actual chat of the main, get to know some people maybe. You can expect this Kata to be a little bit easier to read through, and since there should be no direct need to enter any inputs, you can get started on it more or less straight away. This has been Rillian for 2_MK. Have a good night, everyone.